The morning of September 15th started like any other Saturday in Central Park. 3-year-old Sofia Martinez clutched a small bag of breadcrumbs in her tiny fist, her eyes sparkling with excitement as she spotted the family of ducks gliding across the pond. Her mother, Elena Martinez, a seasoned investigative journalist for the Denver Post, sat on a nearby bench, occasionally glancing up from her laptop where she was finishing an article about city budget allocations. The autumn air was crisp, filled with the laughter of children and the distant sounds of the city waking up. "Mama, look, the baby ducks are hungry." Sofia squealed with delight, carefully tossing small pieces of bread into the water. Her pink dress with butterfly patterns fluttered in the gentle breeze as she giggled at the duck's enthusiastic response. This simple moment of pure childhood joy would be the last carefree memory the Martinez family would have for months to come. Across the park, Officer Jake Morrison was wrapping up what should have been a routine community policing event. The 28-year-old officer, with his clean-shaven face and confident demeanor, had been partnered with Rex, a 90-pound German Shepherd, for 8 months. The canine unit was showcasing their capabilities to a group of local families, demonstrating how police dogs could detect drugs and assist in various law enforcement scenarios. Children had been petting the specially trained therapy dogs earlier, but Rex was kept at a distance. He was a working dog, Morrison explained to curious parents, trained for more serious police work. What the families didn't know was that Rex had been displaying increasingly aggressive behavior over the past few weeks. Morrison had filed 3 separate incident reports about the dog's unpredictable reactions to children, but his supervisor, Sergeant Bradley Coleman, had dismissed them as adjustment issues and ordered Morrison to work it out. The department had invested too much money in Rex's training to admit there might be a problem. As Morrison spoke with a group of parents about police safety programs, Rex suddenly became agitated. The dog's ears perked up, his body tensing as he fixated on something across the park. Morrison noticed the change, but assumed Rex had spotted a squirrel or another animal. "Easy, boy," he muttered, maintaining his grip on the leash while continuing his conversation about neighborhood watch programs. But Rex had locked onto Sofia. Without warning, the powerful German Shepherd lunged forward with such force that the leather leash slipped from Morrison's grip. The officer watched in horror as 90 pounds of muscle and training instinct charged across the open grass directly toward the unsuspecting toddler. "Rex, stop!" "Rex!" Morrison screamed, sprinting after his partner, but the dog was already covering ground at an alarming speed. Sofia was completely unaware of the approaching danger. She had wandered a few feet closer to the water's edge, delighted by a particularly bold duck that was swimming near the shore. Her small voice carried across the park as she chattered to her new feathered friends, completely absorbed in the magical world of childhood wonder. The attack happened in seconds, but for everyone who witnessed it, time seemed to slow to an agonizing crawl. Rex struck Sofia from behind, his massive frame colliding with her tiny body and sending her tumbling face first onto the concrete pathway that bordered the pond. The impact made a sickening sound that would haunt witnesses for years to come. Sofia's scream of terror and pain pierced the peaceful morning air as Rex's teeth grazed her left arm, tearing through the delicate fabric of her dress and breaking the skin underneath. Elena looked up from her laptop at the sound of her daughter's scream and saw a scene from her worst nightmares. "Sofia!" she shrieked, abandoning her work and racing toward the chaos. Other parents were yelling, children were crying, and Officer Morrison was shouting commands at Rex, who seemed momentarily confused by his own actions. Blood began to stain Sofia's pink butterfly dress as she lay motionless on the concrete, too shocked to move or make another sound. Rex stood over her, panting heavily, his tail no longer wagging as he seemed to realize what he had done. The dog backed away slowly, allowing Morrison to finally grab his collar and pull him back. Elena reached her daughter and gathered her into her arms, her hands shaking as she examined the wounds on Sophia's arm. "Baby, Mama's here, Mama's here," she whispered frantically, her journalist's training kicking in as she mentally catalogued every detail of the scene while fighting back panic. Blood seeped through her fingers as she applied pressure to the gashes, her white blouse quickly becoming stained crimson. "I need an ambulance." Elena screamed to the crowd that had gathered. Someone call 911. Several people were already on their phones, their faces pale with shock at what they had just witnessed. A retired nurse named Margaret Chun pushed through the crowd and knelt beside Elena, helping to assess Sophia's injuries while they waited for emergency services. Officer Morrison approached cautiously, his face drained of all color. "Ma'am, I am so incredibly sorry. I don't know what happened. Rex has never this isn't." His words stumbled over each other as the full weight of the situation hit him. His career, his partner's future, and most importantly, this little girl's well-being now hung in the balance. "Don't you dare come near her." Elena snarled with a ferocity that surprised even herself. The protective instincts of motherhood had transformed the usually calm journalist into something fierce and dangerous. "You and that animal have done enough damage." By this time, smartphones had emerged from pockets and purses all around the park. The age of social media meant that within minutes, multiple angles of the attack were being uploaded to Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to show the massive police dog charging at a tiny girl who was simply feeding ducks with her mother. The ambulance arrived 12 minutes later, followed closely by 2 police cruisers and a fire truck. Paramedics Jennifer Walsh and David Kim immediately went to work on Sophia, who had begun crying softly, a sound that was somehow more heartbreaking than her earlier screams. Elena refused to let go of her daughter's hand as they loaded her onto a small stretcher designed for pediatric patients. "The wounds aren't life-threatening," Paramedic Walsh explained to Elena as they prepared for transport. "But we need to get her to the hospital immediately. There's significant tissue damage, and we need to make sure there's no internal injury from the impact." As the ambulance pulled away from Central Park, Elena looked back through the rear window to see Officer Morrison standing alone beside Rex, both of them looking lost and confused. Crime scene tape was already being strung up around the area where Sophia had fallen, and she could see other officers taking statements from witnesses. What Elena didn't know was that this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would consume her family for months to come. The attack had been captured on the park's security cameras from multiple angles, and within hours, the footage would be viral across every major social media platform. The Denver Police Department's phone lines would be jammed with angry calls from citizens demanding accountability, and the Martinez family would find themselves at the center of a storm that would ultimately expose corruption reaching the highest levels of city government. But for now, as Elena held her traumatized daughter's small hand while the ambulance raced toward Denver General Hospital, all she could think about was the sight of that massive dog bearing down on her baby, and the terrible knowledge that their lives had been forever changed in those 30 seconds of violence and chaos. The fluorescent lights in the Denver County Courthouse hummed overhead like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across the worn marble floors where 3-year-old Emma Martinez sat in complete, haunting silence. Her tiny fingers gripped her stuffed elephant, a once bright yellow creature now faded to the color of old butter from months of desperate clutching, so tightly that her knuckles had turned ghost white. The elephant, whom she had named Peanut during happier times, bore the battle scars of her trauma. One ear chewed to threads, stuffing peeking through stress-worn seams, and a permanent dent from being squeezed through countless sleepless nights. Rosa Martinez, Emma's 62-year-old grandmother, watched her granddaughter, with a mixture of heartbreak and helpless fury that had become as constant as breathing over the past 6 months. Rosa's weathered hands, scarred from decades of housework and gardening, trembled slightly as she filled out yet another stack of legal paperwork forms that seemed to multiply like weeds every time they visited this cold, intimidating place. Child custody modification requests, witness statements, psychological evaluation updates, each document representing another desperate attempt to protect the little girl who had once filled Rosa's small apartment with laughter and endless chatter. Mrs. Martinez, called Jennifer Walsh, Emma's court-appointed child advocate, her voice cutting through the low murmur of legal conversations that echoed through the hallway. Jennifer approached with the careful, measured steps of someone who had learned that sudden movements could send traumatized children deeper into their shells. At 34, Jennifer had seen more broken families than she cared to count, but Emma's case haunted her dreams. In her 10 years as a child advocate, she had never encountered a child whose silence felt so profound, so deliberately protective. "How is she today?" Jennifer asked softly, kneeling to Emma's eye level while maintaining a respectful distance. Emma's dark brown eyes, once sparkling with mischief and wonder, remained fixed on an invisible point somewhere beyond the courthouse. Windows. Those eyes had seen too much for someone who hadn't even lived 4 full years on this earth. Rosa's voice cracked as she whispered, "The same. Dr. Peterson tried again yesterday with the play therapy. Nothing. Not a sound." She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue that had seen too much use. "Me Nita used to sing in the bathtub, you know. She would make up little songs about her toys, about the birds outside our window. Now?" Rosa's voice trailed off into the heartbreaking silence that had become their new normal. The transformation had been swift and devastating. 6 months ago, Emma Martinez had been a typical toddler, chatty, curious, and completely fearless. She had peppered her grandmother with a constant stream of questions. "Why is the sky blue, Abuela? Where do the squirrels go at night? Can I have ice cream for breakfast?" She had been learning Spanish from Rosa and English from her mother, switching between languages with the effortless grace of childhood. Emma had loved books, especially the ones with talking animals, and would insist on reading stories too. Anyone who would listen, making up elaborate tales based on the pictures. But that was before the night that changed everything. Dr. Amanda Peterson, one of Denver's most respected child psychologists, had tried every technique in her considerable arsenal. Play therapy with puppets and dolls that might help Emma act out her experiences. Art therapy where Emma could draw her feelings instead of speaking them. Music therapy that might unlock the melody of her voice through familiar songs. Sand tray therapy where miniature figures could tell the stories Emma couldn't voice. Even experimental techniques like dance movement therapy and pet-assisted counseling with gentle rabbits and guinea pigs. Nothing had worked. Emma would sit through each session with the same heart-wrenching stillness, her small hands either clutching Peanut or folded neatly in her lap, her eyes focused on something only she could see. She would accept crackers and juice when offered, would use the bathroom when prompted, would even color pictures with mechanical precision, but not a single word, not even a whisper, would pass her lips. The police officers who had responded that terrible night had been equally unsuccessful. Detective Maria Santos, a specialist in domestic violence cases involving children, had spent hours trying different approaches. She had brought coloring, books featuring police officers and rescue workers, hoping to show Emma that some adults were safe. She had tried simple yes or no questions, hoping Emma might at least nod or shake her head. She had even attempted to communicate through play, using dolls to act out scenarios that might help Emma express what she had witnessed. Detective Santos had seen many traumatized children in her 15-year career, but Emma's case was different. Most children, even those who had experienced severe trauma, would eventually show some form of communication pointing, gesturing, crying, or even acting out their experiences through aggressive play. Emma did none of these things. She had retreated so far into herself that she seemed to exist in a parallel world where words were unnecessary, where silence was the only safe response to an adult world that had proven capable of unthinkable. Violence. The medical examinations had ruled out physical damage to her vocal cords or hearing. Neurological tests had shown no signs of brain injury. Emma's silence wasn't the result of physical inability to speak. It was a psychological fortress she had built around herself, brick by brick, in the aftermath of witnessing something that had shattered her 3-year-old understanding of safety and trust. Social worker Patricia Hernandez had documented every attempt to reach Emma, creating a thick file that read like a catalog of professional frustration and growing desperation. Speech therapists, child psychiatrists, trauma specialists, and even a pediatric hypnotherapist had all tried their particular approaches. Each had left the sessions with the same bewildered expression, wondering how a child so small could possess such ironclad psychological defenses. As Jennifer Walsh reviewed Emma's file for the 100th time, she noticed Rosa checking the large courthouse clock with increasing anxiety. In less than an hour, they would walk into Judge Patricia Hawkins' courtroom for what might be their final chance to prevent Emma from being forced into unsupervised visits with her father. David Martinez's expensive legal team had been systematically dismantling the case, arguing that without Emma's testimony, there was insufficient evidence to support the allegations of domestic violence. The prosecution had photographs of Sarah Martinez's injuries from that night, bruises that painted a horrific map of violence across her face and arms. They had the 911 recording where Sarah's terrified voice begged for help between sobs. They had the police reports documenting the broken furniture, the shattered dishes, the clear signs of a violent struggle. They had hospital records and witness statements from neighbors who had heard the screaming. But they didn't have the one thing that could make or break the case: the voice of the little girl who had hidden in her closet and watched her father nearly kill her mother. Emma shifted slightly in her chair, adjusting Peanut's position with the careful precision she brought to all her movements now. Rosa reached over to smooth her granddaughter's hair dark brown like her own, but with natural curls that had once bounced with every step Emma took. Now those curls seemed subdued, as if even her hair understood that joy was no longer appropriate. The courthouse buzzer sounded, announcing that court would resume in 15 minutes. Rosa gathered her papers with shaking hands, while Jennifer Walsh knelt once more beside Emma's chair. "Emma, sweetheart," Jennifer said softly, "we're going to go into the big room now, just like we talked about. You don't have to say anything you don't want to say. But if you ever feel like talking, even just a little bit, everyone will listen very carefully to whatever you want to tell us." Emma's eyes flickered almost imperceptibly, the first sign of acknowledgement she had shown in weeks. It was barely noticeable, just the slightest tightening around her eyes, but Jennifer caught it and felt a tiny spark of hope ignite in her chest. As they prepared to enter the courtroom where Emma's future would be decided, none of them could have imagined that salvation would come in the form of a four-legged hero who was, at that very moment, walking through the courthouse doors with his handler, ready to change everything they thought they knew about reaching traumatized children. The mystery of Emma's silence was about to meet its match, though no one in that hallway could have predicted that the key to unlocking her voice would have 4 paws, golden fur, and a heart big enough to hold the secrets of a frightened little girl who had forgotten how to trust the adult world. Time was running out, but hope, like the most persistent of flowers, was about to bloom in the most unexpected place. As she waited for Officer Thompson's email, Elena looked in on Sophia, who, was finally sleeping peacefully for the first time since the attack. Her daughter's small arm was wrapped in white bandages, and even in sleep, Sophia's face showed traces of the fear that had consumed her since. Saturday morning. Elena made a silent promise to her sleeping daughter. No matter how high this conspiracy reached, no matter what threats came their way, she would expose the truth. The Denver Police Department had made a fatal mistake when they decided to cover up Rex's history of violence. They had targeted the wrong family, and Elena Martinez was about to show them exactly what happened when you tried to intimidate an investigative journalist whose child had been hurt. The war for justice was just beginning, and Elena intended to win. The silence was the most terrifying thing Elena Martinez had ever experienced. For 3 weeks and 4 days since the attack, her daughter, who had once been an endless chatterbox, narrating every moment of her day with the exuberant vocabulary of a precocious 3-year-old, had not spoken a single word. Not mama, not hungry, not even no. The child who used to wake up singing songs about butterflies and rainbows now communicated only through haunting stares and violent drawings that made Alana's blood run cold. Dr. Sarah Williams, the city's leading child trauma psychologist, had seen hundreds of cases in her 20-year career, but Sophia Martinez's complete withdrawal into silence was among the most severe she had encountered. The small girl sat motionless in the corner of the therapy room, her back pressed against the wall, clutching a worn stuffed elephant that had become her only source of comfort. Her once bright brown eyes now darted constantly toward the door, as if expecting another attack at any moment. Selective mutism following severe trauma is not uncommon, Dr. Williams explained to Elena during their 4th session, her voice gentle but concerned. But Sophia's case is particularly complex. She's not just choosing not to speak, she appears to be trapped in a state of hypervigilance that's preventing normal cognitive processing. Elena watched through the one-way mirror as Dr. Williams attempted to engage Sophia with toys, books, and art supplies. Her daughter's response was always the same. She would pick up a black crayon and draw the same disturbing image over and over again. A massive black dog with red eyes and sharp white teeth, towering over a tiny figure with long dark hair. Sometimes the small figure was lying down with red marks around it. Sometimes the dog had a badge or uniform drawn nearby. The details varied, but the theme never changed: terror, helplessness, and the overwhelming presence of a predator. The repetitive nature of her drawings suggests she's reliving the trauma continuously. Dr. Williams continued, reviewing the stack of nearly identical pictures Sophia had created over the past weeks. Her mind is stuck in that moment at the park, unable to process what happened and move forward. It's like being trapped in a nightmare that never ends. The nightmare wasn't confined to therapy sessions. At home, Sophia's behavior had become increasingly disturbing and unpredictable. She refused to sleep in her own room, instead curling up in Elena's closet behind hanging clothes where she felt hidden and protected. Elena had tried moving Sophia's bed into the master bedroom, but even then, her daughter would wake up screaming. Multiple times each night, her small body drenched in sweat from nightmares that left her gasping and trembling. Elena's own sleep had become fragmented and restless. She would lie awake listening to Sophia's breathing, alert for any signs of distress. When exhaustion finally took hold and she drifted off, she was invariably jolted awake by Sophia's terrified screams echoing through the house. The sound was primal, desperate, the cry of a creature in mortal fear, the triggers for Sophia's panic. Attacks were becoming more numerous and unpredictable each day. The sound of dogs barking on television would send her diving under tables. The sight of any large, dark-colored animal, even horses or cows in picture books, would cause her to hyperventilate and retreat to the nearest hiding place. But perhaps most heartbreaking was her reaction to anything that reminded her of police officers. When a delivery driver in a dark blue uniform knocked on their door, Sophia ran screaming to the bathroom and locked herself inside for 2 hours. Helena had been forced to quit her job at the Young Denver Post to become her daughter's full-time caregiver and protector. Their savings, already depleted by medical expenses not covered by insurance, were disappearing rapidly. Dr. Williams' specialized therapy sessions cost $200 each, and Sophia needed them 3 times per week. The anxiety medication prescribed by their pediatrician was helping with sleep, but it couldn't touch the deep psychological wounds that were consuming her daughter's developing mind. "We're looking at years of intensive therapy," Dr. Williams had warned Elena during a private consultation. "And even then, there are no guarantees. Childhood trauma this severe can have lasting effects on personality development, trust formation, and emotional regulation. Sophia may always struggle with anxiety and fear responses, even with successful treatment." The financial pressure was crushing, but it paled in comparison to the emotional toll of watching her vibrant, joyful daughter disappear behind walls of fear and silence. Elena found herself mourning the child Sophia had been while simultaneously fighting for the child she might become again. The butterfly dresses hung untouched in Sophia's closet, bright colors and patterns that now seemed to mock the gray, frightened creature her daughter had become. Elena's frustration with the slow pace of recovery was compounded by her growing awareness of the injustice surrounding their situation. While Sophia suffered in silence, Officer Jake Morrison continued his regular patrol duties with Rex as if nothing had happened. Elena had seen them twice while driving through downtown. Denver Morrison looking relaxed and confident, Rex alert and powerful beside him. The sight had triggered such rage in Elena that she had to pull over and wait for her hands to stop shaking before she could drive safely. The Denver Police Department's $15,000 settlement offer remained on Elena's kitchen table, unsigned and increasingly insulting as the true scope of Sophia's trauma became clear. Captain Sterling had called twice more, each time with subtle pressure to resolve this matter quickly for everyone's benefit. His latest call had included a thinly veiled warning about the dangers of making this a public spectacle that could further traumatize your daughter. But Elena was beginning to understand that Sophia's healing might require more than therapy and medication. It might require justice. Dr. Williams had mentioned something during their last session that stuck with Elena for days afterward. Children who experience trauma often need to reclaim their sense of agency and safety. Sometimes that means confronting a source of their fear in a controlled, safe environment. But that's a decision that requires very careful consideration and extensive preparation. Elena had pressed for more details. "You mean she might need to see Rex again?" "Not necessarily Rex specifically," Dr. Williams had clarified. "But children sometimes need to prove to themselves that they can survive the thing that hurt them. It's complicated, and it doesn't work for every child, but in some cases, controlled exposure therapy can be transformative." The idea terrified Elena almost as much as it intrigued her. The thought of putting Sophia anywhere near another police dog seemed unthinkable, yet she couldn't ignore the possibility that it might be the key to her daughter's recovery. But first, there were other battles to fight. Elena had spent the previous evening reviewing the evidence she had compiled over the past month. Officer Sarah Thompson's leaked documents, witness statements, video footage, and her own investigation into Rex's history in Phoenix. The picture that emerged was damning a systematic cover-up that had put her daughter and countless other children at risk. She had also been in contact with civil rights attorney Jennifer Liu, whose reputation for taking on police misconduct cases was legendary in Denver legal circles. Liu had reviewed Elena's evidence and agreed to take the case on a contingency basis, meaning Elena wouldn't have to pay attorney fees unless they won a settlement or judgment. This isn't just about compensation for Sophia's injuries, Lou had explained during their initial consultation. This is about preventing other children from suffering the same trauma. Rex is still on active duty, Mrs. Martinez, until someone forces the Denver Police Department to acknowledge his dangerous history. He remains a threat to every child in this city. Elena looked at her daughter, who was sitting on the living room floor methodically tearing apart a magazine, seeking out pictures of dogs to crumple and throw away. Sophia's systematic destruction of these images was both heartbreaking and encouraging. It showed she was trying to exert some control over her fear. Even if she couldn't yet articulate it, the decision to pursue legal action would mean months, or possibly years of depositions, court appearances, and media attention. It would mean reliving the trauma repeatedly, potentially slowing Sophia's recovery process. But it might also mean ensuring that no other 3-year-old would experience the terror that had stolen her daughter's voice and joy. Elena knelt beside Sophia and gently touched her daughter's shoulder. Sophia looked up with those enormous, haunted eyes that broke Elena's heart every single day. "Baby," Elena whispered, "Mama's going to make sure the bad dog can never hurt you or anyone else ever again. I promise." Sophia didn't respond with words, but she leaned against her mother's side, the first voluntary physical contact she had initiated since the attack. It wasn't much, but for Elena, it felt like a sign that somewhere inside her silent, frightened daughter, the fighter she had always been, was still alive and waiting for the right moment to emerge. The war for justice was about to begin in earnest, and Elena Martinez was determined to win it for every child who deserved to feed ducks in the park without fear. Officer Maria Santos knew she was signing her own death warrant the moment she made the decision to contact Elena Martinez. For 6 weeks, she had watched the department systematically destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, and silence anyone who dared question the official narrative about Rex's attack on little Sophia. As a 15-year veteran of the force, and a mother of 2 young daughters herself, Maria could no longer stomach the conspiracy that was protecting a dangerous animal while destroying an innocent family. The breaking point came during a closed-door meeting in Chief Anderson's office on a cold Tuesday morning in late October. Maria had been summoned along with 5 other officers who had witnessed Rex's previous incidents of aggression. What she heard in that room would haunt her for the rest of her life, however long that might be. "Gentlemen and Officer Santos," Chief Anderson began, his steely gray eyes scanning the room with the intensity of a predator assessing potential threats. "We have a situation that requires absolute unity and discretion. The Martinez family is making noise about pursuing legal action, and we cannot allow a single incident to undermine years of successful K-9 operations in this city." Maria felt her stomach churn as Anderson outlined what he euphemistically called a narrative management strategy. In reality, it was a comprehensive cover-up that would require every person in that room to lie under oath if the case went to trial. Incident reports would be lost, witnesses would be discredited, and Rex's history would be completely sanitized. Officer Morrison has already submitted a revised report that clarifies the accidental nature of the incident, Anderson continued, sliding copies across his mahogany desk. "Each of you will sign statements confirming that Rex showed no signs of aggression prior to the Central Park event, and that his contact with the child was clearly unintentional." Maria's hands trembled as she read the fabricated statement bearing her name. According to this version of events, she had never witnessed Rex lunging at a jogger 3 months earlier, never seen him snap at a child during a school visit, never filed the incident report that was now mysteriously missing from departmental records. The document painted Rex as a model police dog whose only mistake was an unfortunate case of enthusiastic playfulness. "Chief Anderson," Maria said carefully, "some of these statements contradict our previous reports. What happens if internal affairs or outside investigators ask about the discrepancies? Anderson's smile was cold and predatory. Officer Santos, I'm sure you're aware that police personnel files are subject to periodic review and updating. Sometimes, older reports contain inaccuracies that need to be corrected. Sometimes reports are filed in error and need to be removed entirely. The important thing is that we present a unified, accurate account of Rex's exemplary service record. The threat was unmistakable. Sign the false statement or face career destruction through manufactured disciplinary actions. Maria looked around. The room at her fellow officers, seeing the same mixture of fear and resignation in their eyes. These were good cops who had joined the force to protect and serve, now being forced to choose between their integrity and their livelihoods. But Maria had one crucial piece of information that Anderson didn't know she possessed. 3 days earlier, she had received a call from her former partner, Detective Rick Coleman, who now worked for the Phoenix Police Department. Rick had heard about the Denver incident through law enforcement networks and called to warn Maria about Rex's true history. Maria, that dog should have been put down 2 years ago, Rick had told her in a hushed, urgent voice. I worked the case when he nearly killed that little girl here in Phoenix. The attack was so vicious that the emergency room staff thought she might not survive. Her face was completely destroyed, took 6 surgeries to reconstruct. But somehow, all the paperwork disappeared, and Rex got transferred instead of euthanized. Rick had gone on to explain how Phoenix Chief of Police Margaret Hendricks had been receiving kickbacks from Apex K9 Training Systems, the company that supplied Rex and other aggressive dogs to police departments across the Southwest. Rather than acknowledge that their training methods were producing dangerous animals, Apex and their corrupt law enforcement partners were shuffling problem dogs from city to city, covering up attacks and collecting training fees while innocent civilians paid the price. Denver's Chief Anderson is Hendricks' brother-in-law, Rick had revealed. This goes way deeper than just one bad dog, Maria. This is organized criminal conspiracy masquerading as law enforcement. Armed with this explosive information, Maria knew she couldn't sign Anderson's false statement without becoming complicit in a conspiracy that had already destroyed multiple families and would continue to endanger children across the region. But she also knew that refusing to sign would mark her for retaliation that could extend far beyond losing her. The meeting concluded with Anderson giving each officer 24 hours to review and sign their statements. As Maria walked to her patrol car, her mind raced through increasingly desperate scenarios. She could sign the statement and live with the guilt of protecting Rex while Sofia Martinez continued to suffer. She could refuse to sign and face manufactured charges that would destroy her career and potentially land her in prison. Or she could take the most dangerous path of all, become a whistleblower and hope that exposing the truth would somehow protect her from the inevitable retaliation. That evening, Maria sat in her modest 2-bedroom apartment, watching her twin daughters, Isabella and Carmen, play with their toy police cars in the living room. At 7 years old, they were only slightly older than Sofia Martinez, and Maria couldn't stop imagining how she would feel if some corrupt department had covered up an attack on one of her babies. The thought made her physically ill. She picked up her phone and dialed Elena Martinez's number, which she had obtained through carefully worded inquiries to contacts in the records department. Her hands were shaking so violently that she could barely press the numbers. Mrs. Martinez? This is Officer Maria Santos with the Denver Police Department. I believe you're being lied to about your daughter's case, and I think I can help you find the truth. A conversation that followed would change both their lives forever. Maria arranged to meet Elena at an abandoned warehouse in an industrial district on the outskirts of Denver, far from any surveillance cameras or potential witnesses who might report back to Chief Anderson. The location felt appropriately dramatic. For what Maria knew would be the most dangerous decision of her life, at 11:30 p.m. on Wednesday night, Maria pulled into the empty parking lot and waited in her personal vehicle with the engine running and her service weapon within easy reach. She had brought copies of every document she could safely access: Rex's real incident reports from Phoenix, emails between Anderson and Apex K9 Systems, financial records showing suspicious payments, and most damning of all, recorded phone conversations between Anderson and Phoenix Chief Hendricks discussing how to manage the Martinez situation. When Elena arrived, Maria could see the exhaustion and determination etched in the other woman's face. Here was a mother who had been pushed to her absolute limit and was ready to fight back with everything she had. "Mrs. Martinez," Maria began, her voice barely above a whisper as they sat in Elena's car reviewing the documents. "What I'm about to show you will prove that your daughter's attack wasn't an accident. Rex has been systematically moved from department to department, covering up a trail of mauled children. But this conspiracy goes much deeper than just one dog." As Elena absorbed the shocking evidence, Maria explained the full scope of the corruption they were facing. Apex K9 Systems was essentially running a criminal enterprise, selling aggressive, poorly trained dogs to police departments while paying kickbacks to chiefs and commissioners who agreed to cover up attacks. When a dog became too notorious in one city, they would simply transfer it to another department with falsified records and continue collecting training fees. "They've been doing this for at least 5 years, Maria continued, glancing nervously at the warehouse shadows around them. "Rex is just one of dozens of dangerous dogs they've placed in departments across 7 states. We're talking about hundreds of victims, Mrs. Martinez. Children, elderly people, innocent civilians who trusted that police dogs were properly trained and safe." Elena's rage was palpable as she realized that Sophia's attack was part of a much larger pattern of corporate greed and police corruption. How many other families are suffering because these monsters care more about money than public safety? She demanded. "Too many," Maria replied sadly. "But here's the thing: you and your daughter might be the key to stopping all of this. The Martinez case has gotten more media attention than any of the previous attacks. If we can expose the truth about Rex's history and the cover-up, it could bring down the entire network." Maria handed Elena a flash drive containing digital copies of all the evidence. "This contains everything I could safely obtain without raising suspicions. But Mrs. Martinez, you need to understand what you're up against. These people have already proven they're willing to sacrifice children to protect their profits. They won't hesitate to destroy anyone who threatens their operation." As if summoned by her words, a black SUV with tinted windows slowly cruised past the warehouse entrance. Both women tensed, watching as the vehicle made a second pass before disappearing into the night. "They're already watching you," Maria said grimly. "And now that I've contacted you, they'll be watching me too. We're both in serious danger from this point forward." Elena gripped the flash drive tightly, feeling the weight of hundreds of victims' stories in her hands. "Officer Santos, why are you risking everything to help us?" Maria looked at Elena with tears in her eyes. "Because I have 2 little girls at home, and I can't sleep knowing that Rex is still out there, still patrolling neighborhoods where children play. Because I became a police officer to protect people, not to help criminals hide behind badges. And because your daughter deserves justice, even if it costs me everything." As they prepared to leave the warehouse, Maria delivered one final warning that would echo in Elena's mind for weeks to come. "Mrs. Martinez, from this moment forward, trust no one in law enforcement except me. The corruption goes higher than you can imagine, and they have resources you can't compete with. But you have something they don't: the truth. And sometimes, if you're brave enough and smart enough, the truth is enough to bring down even the most powerful criminals." Maria Santos drove home that night, knowing she had crossed a line from which there was no return. By morning, she would be marked for destruction by forces that had successfully silenced dozens of victims before Elena Martinez. But for the first time in months, she was able to sleep peacefully, knowing she had finally chosen to stand with the innocent rather than the corrupt. The war for justice was about to escalate to a level that would shock everyone involved. And the stakes couldn't be higher. The safety of children across multiple states hung in the balance. Attorney Michael Torres had built his reputation as Denver's most tenacious civil rights lawyer by taking on impossible cases and winning them through sheer determination and brilliant legal strategy. His office walls were lined with photographs of grateful clients' families who had suffered police brutality, victims of corporate negligence, whistleblowers who had exposed government corruption. When Elena Martinez walked into his downtown office on a gray November morning, Torres saw another opportunity to strike a blow for justice against an abusive system. What Elena didn't know was that Michael Torres had been compromised for over 2 years. The corruption had begun subtly, as it always did. Torres had been representing the family of Marcus Williams, a teenager shot by Denver police during a traffic stop that had escalated unnecessarily. The case was solid, multiple witnesses, clear video evidence of excessive force, and a grieving family that deserved justice. Torres was preparing for trial when he received an unexpected visit from Chief Anderson and City Attorney David Sterling. "Mr. Torres," Sterling had said during that first meeting, "we understand you're a man who appreciates the complexities of the legal system. Sometimes what appears to be a clear-cut case has nuances that might not be immediately apparent." Torres had dismissed their initial overtures, but the pressure had escalated quickly. Anonymous tips led to an IRS audit of his practice. His malpractice insurance was mysteriously canceled and proved difficult to renew. Clients began receiving visits from investigators asking pointed questions about Torres' competence and integrity. Within 6 months, his practice was hemorrhaging money and clients. The final blow came when Torres discovered that his teenage son, Miguel, had been arrested on manufactured drug charges. The arresting officer was none other than Jake Morrison, and the evidence had been planted so expertly that even Torres couldn't immediately spot the fraud. Sterling's message was crystal clear. Drop the Williams case and accept that some battles couldn't be won, or watch his son disappear into the juvenile justice system. Torres had made his deal with the devil, and for 2 years he had walked the tightrope of appearing to fight for justice while actually serving the interests of the Denver Police Department. He took cases that made him look legitimate, while ensuring they never posed a real threat to the corrupt system he now served. His clients never knew they had been betrayed by the very person they trusted to seek justice. When Elena Martinez arrived with her explosive evidence about Rex and the Apex K9 conspiracy, Torres saw an opportunity to finally earn his freedom from Sterling's control. The case was too high profile to simply dismiss, and the evidence was too compelling to ignore. But Sterling had other plans. "Michael," Sterling said during their private meeting the day before the first hearing, "I think you understand the situation. Here, Mrs. Martinez has some concerning ideas about pursuing this case aggressively. We need you to help her understand that sometimes the best outcome for everyone involved is a quick, quiet settlement." Torres stared at the settlement documents. Sterling had prepared $50,000 for the Martinez family in exchange for complete silence about Rex's history and a binding non-disclosure agreement that would prevent Elena from ever speaking publicly about the attack. It was more money than Sterling's initial hospital offer, but it was still an insult compared to the scope of Sophia's trauma and the magnitude of the conspiracy Elena had uncovered. "David, the evidence she's brought me is devastating," Torres protested weakly. "Rex's history, the cover-up, the multi-state conspiracy. This could bring down the entire K9 program and expose years of corruption." Sterling's smile was coldly patient. Michael, I think you're forgetting about Miguel's upcoming hearing for his parole violation. It would be unfortunate if that case took an unexpected turn for the worse. And I believe your malpractice insurance is up for renewal next month? These things can be so unpredictable. The threat was clear, and Torres felt the familiar knot of helpless rage in his stomach. His son's future and his own career remained hostages to Sterling's criminal conspiracy. He would have to find a way to sabotage Elena's case without appearing. To do so deliberately. The first hearing was scheduled for a gray Tuesday morning in Judge Patricia Williams' courtroom. What Elena didn't know was that Judge Williams owed her position to Chief Anderson's political connections and had been receiving consulting fees from Apex K9 Systems for over 3 years. The fix was in from every possible angle. Elena arrived at the courthouse early, clutching the flash drive containing Maria Santos' evidence and a thick folder of documentation she had assembled during weeks of investigation. She had spent the previous night reviewing her testimony with Torres, who had seemed strangely distracted and reluctant to discuss their strongest evidence. Mrs. Martinez, Torres had said during their preparation session, I think we should focus on the immediate damages to Sofia, rather than getting bogged down in conspiracy theories about multi-state corruption. Judges prefer simple, straightforward cases. Elena had found his advice puzzling, given that the conspiracy evidence was their most powerful weapon against the department's attempts to dismiss the case as an isolated accident. But she trusted Torres' legal expertise and agreed to follow his strategy. The hearing began with Judge Williams setting an oddly informal tone that immediately put Elena on edge. Rather than the solemn, professional atmosphere she expected, Williams seemed more interested in moving through the proceedings quickly than examining the evidence carefully. Mr. Torres, Judge Williams began, I understand your client is seeking damages related to an unfortunate incident involving a police service animal. What exactly is the nature of your complaint? Torres stood slowly, and Elena noticed his hands were shaking as he approached the podium. Your Honor, we're seeking compensation for injuries sustained by 3-year-old Sofia Martinez when she was attacked by a Denver Police K9 unit dog named Rex during a community policing event at Central Park. Attacked? Judge Williams raised an eyebrow skeptically. That seems like rather inflammatory language, Mr. Torres. According to the police report I've reviewed, this was an accidental contact during a routine demonstration. Elena felt her heart sink as Torres failed to challenge the judge's characterization. This was the moment to present Rex's real history, to expose the cover-up, to reveal the systematic fraud that had enabled a dangerous animal to remain on active duty. Instead, Torres simply nodded and continued with his weak presentation. Your Honor, while the contact may have been unintentional, the injuries to my client's daughter were severe and have resulted in ongoing trauma requiring extensive therapy. Sterling rose from the defendant's table with a confident smile. Your Honor, the Denver Police Department deeply regrets this unfortunate accident, but we must emphasize that it was exactly that, an accident. Rex is a highly trained police dog with an exemplary service record. This isolated incident appears to have been the result of unexpected circumstances that could not have been anticipated or prevented. Elena wanted to scream. Sterling was lying. Under oath, claiming Rex had an exemplary service record when she had documented evidence of multiple attacks in Phoenix and Denver. She looked desperately at Torres, expecting him to object, to present their evidence, to expose Sterling's perjury. Instead, Torres remained silent. Mr. Torres, Judge Williams said pointedly, do you have evidence that contradicts the police department's characterization of this incident as an isolated accident? This was the moment Elena had been waiting for. Torres had the flash drive. The Phoenix incident reports, the evidence of financial corruption, witness statements proving Rex's history of aggression. Elena held her breath, waiting for him to present the devastating case they had built together. Your Honor, Torres said slowly, we believe the evidence supports our claim for damages based on the injuries sustained, regardless of the circumstances that led to those injuries. Elena felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Torres was deliberately avoiding their strongest evidence, refusing to challenge Sterling's lies, essentially conceding that the attack was accidental. She started to stand, ready to speak for herself. But Torres quickly placed a restraining hand on her arm. Judge Williams nodded approvingly. Mr. Torres, that seems like a reasonable approach. However, I'm concerned about the precedent we might set by awarding significant damages for what appears to be an unfortunate accident during legitimate police operations. Perhaps this matter would be better resolved through settlement discussions, rather than prolonged litigation that could be traumatic for your young client. Sterling immediately seized the opening. Your Honor, the city has prepared a settlement offer that we believe fairly compensates the Martinez family for their inconvenience, while avoiding the stress and uncertainty of a prolonged trial. Elena watched in horror as Sterling presented the same $50,000 settlement she had already rejected, now framed as a generous offer that would spare Sophia the trauma of testifying. Judge Williams reviewed the documents with obvious approval. This seems quite reasonable, Williams declared. Mr. Torres, I strongly encourage your client to accept this settlement. Continuing with litigation would require extensive discovery, depositions, and ultimately testimony from young Sophia herself. Surely the family's priority should be the child's recovery rather than pursuing a costly legal battle with uncertain outcomes. Elena could no longer contain herself. Your Honor, this is Mrs. Martinez. Judge Williams interrupted sharply. You are represented by counsel. Please allow Mr. Torres to speak for you. Torres shot Elena a warning look before addressing the court. Your Honor, we appreciate the court's guidance and will certainly advise our client to consider the settlement offer carefully. As the hearing concluded with no evidence presented and no real arguments made, Elena felt a crushing sense of betrayal. She had trusted Torres to fight for Sophia, to expose the truth about Rex and the conspiracy that had enabled her daughter's attack. Instead, he had essentially surrendered without firing a shot. Walking out of the courthouse, Elena confronted Torres in the hallway, her voice shaking with rage and confusion. Michael, what the hell just happened in there? You had all the evidence. You knew Rex's history. You knew about the cover-up. You knew Sterling was lying under oath. Why didn't you present any of our case? Torres couldn't meet her eyes. Elena, sometimes the legal system is more complicated than it appears. Sometimes the best outcome for everyone involved is to accept a reasonable settlement and move on. A reasonable settlement? Elena's voice rose to near shouting. My daughter was mauled by an animal that should have been euthanized years ago. We have evidence of a criminal conspiracy spanning multiple states. How is $50,000 and a gag order a reasonable outcome? Torres finally looked at her, and Elena saw something in his eyes that chilled her to the bone: fear, guilt, and the hollow resignation of a man who had sold his soul. Elena, I think you should take the settlement. Fighting the system isn't always possible, and sometimes trying to fight back just makes things worse for everyone. As Torres walked away, leaving Elena standing alone in the courthouse hallway, she realized she had been betrayed by the very person she had trusted to seek justice for her daughter. But the betrayal also clarified something important. If she wanted justice for Sophia, she would have to fight for it herself. That evening, Elena called civil rights attorney Jennifer Liu, whose reputation for taking on impossible police corruption cases was legendary. When Elena explained what had happened in court, and showed Lou the evidence Torres had refused to present. Lou's response was immediate and decisive. "Mrs. Martinez, you've been the victim of a sophisticated legal sabotage operation. But here's the thing, they just made a critical mistake by showing their hand too early. Now we know exactly who we're fighting and what tactics they'll use. And I can promise you this, they picked the wrong family to try to silence." The real legal battle was about to begin, and Elena Martinez was ready for war. The breakthrough came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night in early December, exactly 8 weeks after the attack that had stolen Sofia Martinez's voice. Elena jolted awake to the sound of her daughter, speaking for the first time since that horrific day at Central Park. But the words that emerged from Sofia's lips in the darkness of their bedroom made Elena's blood freeze in her veins. "Mama," Sofia whispered urgently, her small body trembling beneath the blankets, "the bad dog is coming tonight. He's bringing the man with the shiny button." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as she reached for the bedside lamp, flooding the room with soft yellow light. Sofia was sitting upright, her enormous brown eyes wide with terror, but also with a clarity that Elena hadn't seen since the attack. Her daughter was no longer trapped in silent trauma. She was trying to warn her mother about something. "Baby," Elena said gently, pulling Sofia into her arms. "You're safe. We're at home. There's no dog here." But Sofia shook her head frantically, pointing toward the bedroom window. "Not here yet, Mama, but coming. I can feel the scary in my tummy. The bad dog remembers my smell." The words were heartbreaking and terrifying in equal measure. Dr. Sarah Williams had warned Elena that children who experienced severe trauma sometimes developed hypervigilance that could manifest as seemingly psychic awareness of danger. Their nervous systems remained in constant fight-or-flight mode, creating an uncanny ability to detect threats that adults might miss. Elena tried to comfort her daughter, but Sofia's agitation only increased as the night progressed. She drew picture after picture of the same disturbing scene: a large black dog and a uniformed figure approaching a house that looked remarkably like their own modest two-story home on Maple Street. In some drawings, the figures were outside windows. In others, they were already inside. At first, Elena dismissed her daughter's fears as trauma-induced nightmares bleeding into waking consciousness. But when she checked the home security system she had installed after Maria Santos' warnings, her blood turned to ice. The motion sensors showed unusual activity around their property between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m., exactly when Sofia had woken up terrified. Elena immediately called Jennifer Liu, her new attorney, who had given her a 24-hour emergency number for exactly this type of situation. "Elena," Liu said, her voice sharp with concern despite the early hour, "pack a bag for you and Sofia right now. Don't turn on any lights and leave through the back door. I'm sending someone to pick you up in 15 minutes. Jennifer, I might be overreacting. Sofia's been having nightmares, and—" "Elena, listen to me carefully," Liu interrupted. "Yesterday, my office received intelligence that Apex K9 Systems and their police department allies have moved beyond legal intimidation. They're now using direct surveillance and harassment to silence witnesses. Sofia's reaction suggests she may have sensed something that your security system missed." Within 20 minutes, Elena and Sofia were in the back of an unmarked van driven by Liu's security specialist, Marcus Webb, a former FBI agent who specialized in protecting whistleblowers and their families. As they drove through the empty Denver streets toward a safe house, Webb explained the escalating danger they faced. "Mrs. Martinez, Officer Santos isn't the only person who's tried to expose this conspiracy. In the past 2 years, 3 other law enforcement officers in different states have attempted to reveal Apex's corruption. One was killed in what appeared to be a routine traffic accident. Another died in a suspicious house fire. The third suffered A complete psychological breakdown after his family received death threats and is now in a psychiatric facility. Elena held Sophia tighter, realizing that her daughter's attack was part of something far more sinister than she had initially understood. They weren't just fighting police corruption. They were battling a criminal organization that was willing to murder to protect their profits. The safe house was a modest apartment in a nondescript building on the outskirts of Denver, equipped with advanced security systems and monitored around the clock by Webb's team. For the first time in weeks, Elena felt like she could breathe without constantly looking over her shoulder. But their sense of safety was shattered the next evening. When Sophia made another chilling observation, Elena was preparing dinner when Sophia suddenly appeared in the kitchen doorway, her face pale with fear. "Mama," she said quietly, "the bad dog man is watching our new house too." Elena dropped the wooden spoon she was holding. "Sophia, what do you mean?" "From the building with the broken window," Sophia explained, pointing toward the apartment complex. "Across the street. He has the looking glasses like Daddy had for watching birds." Elena's ex-husband had been an amateur bird watcher with expensive binoculars, so Sophia understood what surveillance equipment looked like. Elena immediately called Webb, who dispatched a team to investigate the building Sophia had identified. What they found confirmed the little girl's worst fears, evidence of a surveillance post that had been monitoring their safe house since the day they arrived. "They have resources we didn't anticipate," Webb reported grimly. "Professional surveillance equipment, multiple vehicles, possibly corrupt contacts inside law enforcement who are providing them with information about our locations. We need to assume they know where you are at all times." Dr. Williams, who had been conducting therapy sessions at the safe house, was fascinated by Sophia's apparent ability to detect surveillance and threats. "Children who experience severe trauma sometimes develop extraordinary situational awareness," she explained to Elena. "Their nervous systems become so attuned to danger that they can pick up on subtle cues that adults miss changes in routine. Unfamiliar vehicles, people who don't belong in an environment." But Sophia's abilities went beyond typical hypervigilance. Over the following days, she demonstrated an uncanny knack for predicting when they were being followed, when their phone conversations were being monitored, and even when specific individuals posed threats to their safety. The most dramatic example came during a carefully planned court appearance for Elena's second hearing with Jennifer Liu as her new attorney. Despite extensive security precautions and multiple decoy vehicles, Sophia became increasingly agitated as they approached the courthouse. "Mama, don't go inside," Sophia pleaded, clinging to Elena's hand as they stood outside the imposing granite building. "The bad dog smell is everywhere. Something terrible is waiting." Liu had initially dismissed Sophia's concerns as generalized anxiety about returning to a legal environment that had betrayed them before. But when Webb's security sweep revealed that someone had planted listening devices throughout the courtroom and positioned snipers on surrounding buildings, they realized that Sophia had potentially saved their lives. "This isn't just surveillance anymore," Webb reported to Liu after calling off the court appearance. "This is an assassination setup. They were planning to eliminate Elena during the hearing and make it look like a random act of violence." The failed ambush marked a turning point in their struggle against the Apex conspiracy. Liu realized that traditional legal channels were completely compromised and that they needed to take the fight directly to the public through media exposure and federal intervention. But the most devastating revelation came when Sophia demonstrated another disturbing ability. She could identify people connected to the conspiracy simply by being in their presence. During a meeting with FBI agent Rachel Morrison, no relation to Officer Jake Morrison, who was investigating the multi-state Apex conspiracy, Sophia suddenly became agitated when the agent entered their safe house conference room. "Mama," Sophia whispered urgently, tugging on Elena's sleeve. "She has the bad dog smell on her clothes." She talks to the scary phone people. Agent Morrison's face went pale as she realized that a 3-year-old had somehow detected her corruption. For months, Morrison had been feeding information about the federal investigation to Apex's handlers in exchange for payments that were funding her daughter's cancer treatments. Webb immediately placed Morrison under citizen's arrest while Liu called genuine federal authorities to report the compromised agent. Once again, Sophia's traumatic hypervigilance had exposed corruption that might have remained hidden for months. Dr. Williams was both amazed and concerned by Sophia's developing abilities. She's essentially become a living lie detector and threat assessment system, the psychologist explained to Elena. But this level of hypervigilance is exhausting for a child's developing brain. We need to find ways to help her feel safe so she can begin to heal. As December progressed and their legal battle intensified, Sophia's predictions became increasingly specific and alarming. She could tell Elena when their phones were being monitored, when specific individuals were planning to harm them, and even when evidence was being destroyed to protect the conspiracy. The most chilling prediction came on a snowy Thursday evening when Sophia was drawing in her therapy session with Dr. Williams. Instead of her usual pictures of dogs and threatening figures, she drew something new: a courtroom scene with herself standing in front of a judge, surrounded by people in uniforms. "What's happening in this picture, Sophia?" Dr. Williams asked gently. Sophia looked up with those enormous, haunted eyes that had seen too much for any child. "I have to tell the truth, people, about the bad dog, so other little girls don't get hurt," she said simply. "But first, I have to forgive the scared man who couldn't stop the bad dog." Dr. Williams felt chills run down her spine as she realized that Sophia was predicting not just her own testimony, but a moment of forgiveness that would transform everyone involved in their case. "Sophia," Dr. Williams asked carefully, "how do you know what's going to happen?" Sophia considered the question with the serious expression of a much older child. "When the bad dog hurt me, it made a crack in my head where the scared feelings live," she explained. "But it also made a crack where I can see the hurt feelings in other people. The scared man has so much hurt, Mama. He needs someone to say, 'It's okay.'" That night, Elena sat beside her daughter's bed, watching Sophia sleep peacefully for the first time in months. Tomorrow, they would enter the most dangerous phase of their legal battle, facing a corrupt system that had already demonstrated its willingness to kill to protect its secrets. But Elena was no longer afraid. Sophia had found her voice again, and with it, an extraordinary gift for seeing the truth that others tried to hide. Whatever came next, they would face it together, armed with the most powerful weapon of all: a child's unwavering belief in C's justice and forgiveness. The final battle was about to begin, and Sofia Martinez was ready to speak her truth to the world. The federal courthouse in downtown Denver had never seen anything like the media circus that descended on January 15th. Day that would forever change American police accountability. News vans lined the streets for 3 blocks in every direction. Reporters from every major network jockeyed for position, and crowds of protesters held signs demanding justice for Sofia Martinez and the dozens of other victims whose stories were finally being heard. Inside the imposing granite building, Courtroom 7A had been transformed into a fortress. Federal Judge Margaret Chun, carefully selected for her reputation of absolute integrity and her immunity too. Political pressure presided over what had become the most significant police corruption trial in Colorado history. The case had evolved far beyond a simple personal injury lawsuit into a RICO prosecution targeting the entire Apex K9 conspiracy network. Elena Martinez sat in the front row of the gallery, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she watched the most dangerous people in her life file into the defendant's section. Chief Robert Anderson, his once commanding presence diminished by 3 months of investigations and leaked evidence. City Attorney David Sterling, who had orchestrated the cover-up from the beginning. Dr. Marcus Webb from Apex K9 Systems, whose fraudulent training protocols had created Rex and dozens of other dangerous animals. And sitting slightly apart from the others, Officer Jake Morrison, whose haunted eyes and trembling hands told the story of a man destroyed by guilt. Jennifer Liu had spent the previous 4 months building an airtight case that exposed every aspect of the conspiracy, working with FBI agents from outside Colorado to avoid the corruption that had infiltrated the local bureau. She had assembled evidence that painted a picture of systematic fraud spanning 7 states and involving hundreds of victims. The scope was staggering: falsified training records, bribed officials, murdered whistleblowers, and innocent families terrorized into silence. But the most powerful weapon in Liu's arsenal wasn't documentary evidence or expert testimony. It was the small girl sitting beside Elena, wearing a simple blue dress and clutching a stuffed elephant, who had somehow developed the ability to see truth with a clarity that no adult could match. Dr. Sarah Williams had spent weeks preparing Sophia for this moment, using specialized therapy techniques designed to help child witnesses testify in high-stress environments. But nothing could have prepared anyone for what Sophia would reveal when she finally spoke her truth to the world. "Your Honor," Liu announced as she stood to call her final witness, "the prosecution calls Sophia Martinez." The courtroom fell absolutely silent as Elena helped her daughter walk to the witness stand. At 4 years old now, Sophia appeared impossibly small in the adult-sized chair, but her eyes held a gravity that belied her age. The court reporter, Judge Chun, and every person in the gallery leaned forward, understanding that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Liu approached the witness stand with gentle respect, knowing that Sophia's testimony would either bring down the entire conspiracy or provide the defense with grounds for appeal based on the unreliability of child witnesses. "Sophia," Liu began softly, "do you remember what happened to you at Central Park last year?" Sophia nodded solemnly. "The bad dog hurt me because the people who were supposed to keep him safe didn't do their job." Her words were clear and precise, lacking the typical uncertainty of child testimony. Dr. Williams had explained that trauma sometimes created unusual maturity in young victims, forcing them to understand adult concepts like negligence and accountability. "Sophia, can you tell us about the dog that hurt you?" "His name is Rex," Sophia said, her voice steady despite the tears beginning to form in her eyes. "But he's not really bad inside. He's just scared and confused because the people who trained him taught him wrong things. They made him think hurting people was his job." Defense attorney Marcus Webb jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness is clearly repeating rehearsed statements that she couldn't possibly understand." Judge Chun studied Sophia carefully before responding. "Overruled. The witness may continue." Liu nodded encouragingly at Sophia. "Can you tell us about the people who trained Rex?" Sophia's face grew grave as she looked directly at Dr. Webb. "The defendant's section. That man there taught Rex to be afraid of children. He hurt Rex with electricity and loud noises until Rex thought all small people were dangerous. Then he gave Rex to police people and told them Rex was good and safe. But he was lying." Dr. Webb's face had gone completely white. The details Sophia was describing, the specific training techniques used at Apex facilities, were classified information that no 4-year-old should have known. Yet somehow, this child was recounting the exact methods that federal investigators had discovered through months of undercover work. "Sophia," Liu continued, "how do you know these things about Rex's training?" "When the bad thing happened to me, it made a crack in my head where I could feel what other people feel," Sophia explained with the matter-of-fact tone children used to describe the impossible. Rex was scared when he hurt me. He didn't want to do it, but the scared feelings in his head made him think he had to. The courtroom was spellbound. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, transfixed by this child's extraordinary testimony. Sophia, can you tell us about the people who tried to hide what Rex did to you? Sophia's gaze moved across the defendant's table, lingering on each face before settling on Chief Anderson. The chief man knew Rex had hurt other children before me. He has pictures on his desk of little girls who got hurt, but he hid the pictures because someone was giving him money to keep Rex working. Anderson shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. This is preposterous. A 4-year-old cannot possibly— Sit down, Chief Anderson, Judge Chun commanded sharply. You'll have your opportunity to respond during cross-examination. But Sophia wasn't finished. The chief man is scared too, she continued, looking directly at Anderson with those enormous, empathetic eyes. He's scared because he knows he did bad things, but he also knows that if he tells the truth now, the really bad people will hurt his family. He has a little granddaughter who's almost my age. Anderson collapsed back into his chair, the fight completely gone out of him. The detail about his granddaughter wasn't public knowledge. It was something only someone with access to his deepest fears could have known. Sterling tried a different approach. Your Honor, this child is clearly being coached to make inflammatory accusations. There's no possible way she could know the information she's claiming to possess. Judge Chun considered this objection carefully before addressing Sophia directly. Sophia, how do you know these things about people you've never met? Sophia thought for a moment, choosing her words with the careful precision of someone much older. When something really scary happens to you, it changes how you see things. I can feel the hurt and scared feelings in other people now, especially when they're lying or hiding something bad they did. It's like when you get glasses and suddenly you can see things that were always there, but too blurry before. Liu seized the moment. Sophia, looking at the people at that table, what do you sense about each of them? Sophia studied the defendants with the intensity of a much older witness. The dog training man is angry because he thinks everyone is stupid and he's smart. But inside, he's scared that people will find out he hurts animals for money. The city lawyer man is scared because he knows he helped bad people hurt children, and he can't figure out how to make that okay in his heart. Sterling's confident facade cracked completely. These weren't coached responses, they were insights into his psychological state that cut right to the core of his guilt and self-justification. And the chief man, Sophia continued, he's the most scared of all, because he started doing bad things for good reasons, to help his family. But then, the bad things got bigger and bigger until he couldn't stop. He wants to tell the truth now, but he's afraid it's too late. Anderson was openly weeping, his decades of law enforcement training completely overwhelmed by a 4-year-old surgical dissection of his moral collapse. But when Sophia's gaze fell on Officer Jake Morrison, her expression softened completely. And the policeman with the dog, he's different from the others. Liu approached this carefully, knowing that Morrison's testimony could either destroy their case or provide the final piece needed to expose the full conspiracy. What do you sense about Officer Morrison, Sophia? He never wanted to hurt anyone, Sophia said quietly, her voice filled with a compassion that stunned the courtroom. He became a police officer because he wanted to help people, and when they gave him Rex, he tried so hard to keep everyone safe. But the other people lied to him about Rex, and when Rex hurt me, it broke his heart. Morrison was sobbing openly now, his shoulders shaking with the weight of months of guilt and self-recrimination. He thinks it's all his fault, Sophia continued, but it's not. The real fault belongs to the people who lied to him and the people who made Rex scared and angry. Officer Morrison is a good person who got tricked by bad people. Liu realized This was the moment that would define the entire case. Sophia, if you could say something to Officer Morrison, what would it be? Sophia looked directly at Morrison, her young face radiating a wisdom that seemed impossible for someone her age. I would tell him that I don't hate him, and I don't blame him for what happened to me. I would tell him that good people sometimes get fooled by bad people, and that doesn't make them bad too. And I would tell him that if he helps us stop the really bad people, then maybe no other little girls will get hurt like I did. The courtroom erupted as Morrison stood up suddenly, his face streaming with tears. I can't take this anymore, he shouted, turning toward the prosecution table. She's right about everything. I've been living with this guilt for months, and I can't watch a 4-year-old be braver than I am. Defense attorneys tried to silence him, but Morrison was beyond their control. Chief Anderson knew about Rex's previous attacks. We all knew. Sterling paid us to falsify incident reports and transfer Rex instead of euthanizing him. Dr. Webb's company was paying kickbacks to departments across 7 states to keep using their dangerous dogs. I have recordings, documentation, evidence of everything. Judge Chun banged her gavel repeatedly as the courtroom descended into chaos. Reporters were frantically typing, defendants were shouting at each other, and defense attorneys were screaming. Objections that no one could hear over the noise, but in the center of it all, Sophia Martinez sat calmly in the witness chair, having accomplished something that months of FBI investigation and legal maneuvering couldn't achieve. She had broken the conspiracy open with nothing more than truth, compassion, and the extraordinary gift that her trauma had somehow given her. Lou looked at her young client with amazement and respect. Tomorrow would bring sentencing, civil settlements, and the long process of rebuilding Sophia's life. But today, a 4-year-old girl had faced down the most powerful forces of corruption and emerged victorious, not through anger or vengeance, but through an understanding of human nature that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. The final chapter of their battle for justice was about to begin. And Sophia Martinez had just proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption is a child's unwavering belief in the possibility of redemption. The federal courthouse had never witnessed anything like the scene that unfolded in the aftermath of Officer Jake Morrison's explosive confession. As court officers struggled to restore order and defense attorneys huddled in frantic damage control discussions, 4-year-old Sophia Martinez remained seated in the witness chair, watching the chaos around her with the serene composure of someone who had always known this moment would come. Judge Margaret Chun finally restored order after 10 minutes of pandemonium, but the atmosphere in courtroom 7A had fundamentally shifted. Morrison's confession had shattered the defendants' unified defense strategy and exposed the full scope of the Apex K9 conspiracy. Chief Anderson sat slumped in his chair, no longer the commanding figure who had once controlled Denver's police department. City Attorney David Sterling was frantically whispering with his legal team, knowing that Morrison's promised evidence would likely send him to federal prison. Dr. Marcus Webb from Apex K9 Systems stared at Sophia with undisguised amazement, unable to comprehend how a child had so thoroughly dismantled his criminal enterprise. But the most dramatic transformation was in Jake Morrison himself. The officer who had carried crushing guilt for 14 months now sat straighter in his chair, tears still streaming down his face, but with the expression of relief that bordered on euphoria. Sophia's forgiveness had lifted a burden that had been destroying him from the inside out. "Your Honor," Jennifer Liu announced, rising from the prosecution table, in light of Officer Morrison's testimony and his offer to cooperate fully with federal investigators. The prosecution requests a brief recess to consider amendments to our sentencing recommendations. Judge Chun nodded. Granted. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. As the courtroom began to empty, Sophia remained in the witness chair, her attention focused entirely on Morrison, who sat just 20 feet away. Elena Martinez approached her daughter, intending to escort her to the victim's conference room. But Sophia shook her head. "Mama, I need to talk to the sad policeman first," she said quietly. Elena's protective instincts flared immediately. Despite Morrison's confession and apparent remorse, he was still the officer whose negligence had led to Sophia's attack. "Baby, I don't think that's a good idea. He's still—" "Mama," Sophia interrupted gently, "remember what Dr. Williams taught us about healing? Sometimes the person who hurt you needs healing too. And sometimes helping them heal is the only way to finish healing yourself." Dr. Sarah Williams, who had been observing from the gallery, approached them. "Elena, if Sophia feels ready for this interaction, it could be therapeutically beneficial for both of them. But only if it's completely voluntary, and we can control the environment." Elena looked at her daughter, this remarkable child who had somehow transformed her own trauma into a gift for seeing the deepest truths about human nature, and realized that Sophia understood something about forgiveness that most adults never learned. "Okay, baby," Elena said softly, "but Mama stays right here with you." Jennifer Liu arranged for the conversation to take place in the witness conference room, with Elena, Dr. Williams, and Liu herself present as observers. Morrison's attorney initially objected, but Morrison overruled him. "I need to hear what she has to say," Morrison told his lawyer. "I've been dying inside for over a year. If this little girl can find it in her heart to speak to me, then I sure as hell can find the courage to listen." The conference room was small and windowless, furnished with a simple table and 6 chairs. Morrison sat on one side, still wearing his dress uniform, but looking somehow diminished without his badge and weapon. Sophia sat across from him, her legs swinging freely from the adult-sized chair, her stuffed elephant clutched in her small arms. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the broken police officer and the child whose life he had inadvertently changed forever. Morrison spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sophia, I know I can't undo what happened to you. I know I failed to protect you when that was my most important job. I need you to know that not a single day has passed since the attack that I haven't thought about you and wished I could take your place." Sophia studied his face with those enormous brown eyes that seemed to see everything. "You have nightmares too," she observed matter-of-factly. "I can see the scared feelings all around you, just like the ones I used to have." Morrison nodded, tears beginning to flow again. "Every night, I see you falling, I hear you scream, and I can't stop it from happening over and over again. I see your blood on your dress, and I know it's my fault." "But it's not just your fault," Sophia said with the clear logic of childhood. "You didn't know Rex was dangerous because the bad people lied to you. You didn't make Rex hurt me on purpose. You tried to stop him as soon as you could." Morrison shook his head. "I should have known. I should have seen the signs. I should have protected you." Sophia climbed down from her chair and walked around the table to stand directly in front of Morrison. At 4 years old, she barely reached his knee, but somehow her presence filled the entire room. "Mr. Morrison," she said seriously, "do you remember what you were thinking about right before Rex hurt me?" Morrison looked confused by the question. I was talking to some parents about neighborhood safety programs. I was thinking about how to make the community safer for families like yours." "See?" Sophia said, reaching out to touch his hand. "You were thinking about keeping people safe. That's what good police officers do. The bad people tricked you, but that doesn't make you bad too." Morrison stared down at the tiny hand touching his, overwhelmed by the contrast between this child's capacity for forgiveness and his own inability to forgive himself. "Sophia," he said brokenly, "how can you not hate me? How can you even stand to look at me after what I let happen to you?" Sophia considered this question with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. Dr. Williams taught me that hate is like keeping poison in your heart and hoping it hurts the other person. But forgiveness is like opening a window and letting the poison out so fresh air can come in. She paused, gathering her thoughts. And besides, hating you wouldn't bring back the time before I got hurt. But forgiving you might help both of us feel better about the time that comes after. Morrison broke down completely then, sobbing with the raw emotion of a man who had been carrying unbearable guilt for over a year. I'm so sorry, Sophia. I'm so incredibly sorry. And then, in a moment that would be remembered by everyone present for the rest of their lives, Sophia Martinez did something that changed everything. She looked up at this broken man who had been destroyed by the same forces that had hurt her, and she spoke two words that shattered every heart in the room, while simultaneously beginning to heal them. I'm sorry. The adults stared in stunned silence. Morrison stopped crying, confusion replacing his grief. Sophia, what are you sorry for? I'm sorry that the bad people used you to hurt me, she said simply. I'm sorry that they lied to you and made you think Rex was safe. I'm sorry that they made you feel like everything was your fault, when really they were the ones who did bad things. And I'm sorry that you've been so sad and scared for so long. Morrison's world shifted completely in that moment. Here was this tiny victim, who had every right to hate him, instead apologizing to him for the manipulation and corruption that had destroyed both their lives. The profound grace of her words revealed the true villains in their shared tragedy, not the officer who had been deceived, but the criminals who had orchestrated the deception. Sophia, Morrison whispered, you don't owe me an apology. If anyone should be sorry, it's me. We can both be sorry, Sophia said with the practical wisdom of childhood. Sorry for the bad things that happened, and sorry that good people got hurt by bad people. But we don't have to stay sorry forever. We can choose to help each other feel better instead. Morrison knelt down, so he was at Sophia's eye level. What can I do to help you feel better? Help us stop the really bad people, so no other kids get hurt by dogs who are taught wrong things, Sophia said immediately. And help Rex learn to be a good dog again, instead of a scared dog. Rex? Morrison was startled. Sophia, Rex was put down after the attack. He's gone. Sophia shook her head firmly. No, he's not. I can still feel him. He's in a place where they keep dogs that bite people, but he's still alive. And he's still scared and confused, because nobody ever taught him the right way to be around children. Morrison's eyes widened as he realized Sophia was right. Rex hadn't been euthanized, as he'd been told the dog had been transferred to a secure facility, pending the outcome of the legal proceedings. Somehow, this remarkable child knew details about the case that even he didn't possess. You want to help Rex? Morrison asked incredulously. Rex was a victim too, Sophia explained. The bad people hurt his brain with scary training until he thought little kids were dangerous. But dogs can learn new things if someone teaches them with kindness instead of fear. Dr. Williams was furiously taking notes, recognizing that they were witnessing something unprecedented in trauma. Recovery, a victim who had developed such profound empathy that she was now advocating for her attacker's rehabilitation. Morrison made a decision that would define the rest of his life. Sophia, if you can forgive me, and if you can even find compassion for Rex, then I promise you that I will spend every day for the rest of my life working to make sure no other family goes through what yours did. I'll testify against everyone involved in this conspiracy. I'll help reform canine training programs across the country. And if it's possible, I'll help Rex learn to be the dog he was meant to be before they twisted him into something dangerous. Sophia smiled, the first genuine, joyful smile Elena had seen from her daughter since the attack. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I think that would help both of us heal. When they returned to the courtroom 30 minutes later, the world had fundamentally changed. Morrison's cooperation with federal investigators led to the largest police corruption conviction in Colorado history. Chief Anderson received 15 years in federal prison. Sterling got 12 years and was disbarred. Dr. Webb and Apex K9 Systems faced RICO charges that would eventually shut down their operation permanently and result in the rescue and rehabilitation of dozens of improperly trained police dogs. But more importantly, Sofia Martinez had demonstrated something that legal experts and trauma specialists would study for decades to come, that the most powerful force for justice isn't vengeance or punishment, but the extraordinary human capacity for forgiveness and redemption. Morrison kept his promise. He became a leading advocate for police reform and canine training improvements. Rex was indeed still alive, and under Morrison's supervision, and with specialized animal behaviorists, the dog underwent 2 years of rehabilitation training that transformed him from a dangerous weapon into a gentle therapy animal who now works with children who have experienced trauma. The Martinez family received a $12 million settlement that funded Sofia's continued therapy and established a foundation dedicated to protecting children from police brutality and advocating for proper K-9 training standards. But the money was never what mattered most to Alana or Sofia. What mattered was that Sofia had found her voice again, not in anger or bitterness, but in a profound understanding of human nature that allowed her to see beyond the surface of events, to the deeper truths about good and evil, corruption and redemption, fear and love. On the first anniversary of the attack, Sofia and Alana returned to Central Park. This time, they brought Morrison and Rex, the rehabilitated Rex, who now wore a therapy dog vest instead of a police harness. Children gathered around them, drawn by Sofia's laughter as she fed ducks with the same joy she had shown before her world was shattered. When a little girl asked Sofia if she was afraid of the big dog, Sofia smiled and patted Rex's head gently. "I used to be scared," she said simply. "But then I learned that being scared doesn't help anybody feel better. Helping each other feel better is much more fun." Elena watched her daughter, this remarkable child, who had transformed her own trauma into a gift for healing others, and realized that sometimes the most devastating events in our lives can become the foundation for the most extraordinary acts of grace and redemption. Sofia Martinez had faced down corruption, forgiven her attacker, and changed the lives of everyone involved with just 2 words that revealed the deepest truth about human nature, that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose love over hate, healing over vengeance, and hope over despair. And sometimes that choice changes everything.